Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Future Ready Leadership. My guest today, Bob Bordone. He's the best-selling author of a new book called Conflict Resilience: Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In. He's also a senior fellow at Harvard Law School, where he founded the school's negotiation and mediation clinic. Bob, thank you for joining me.
Jacob, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So first question I have to ask is, why did you feel the need to write this book?
Yeah, thanks. The idea for this book is several years in the making and is really born of my teaching at Harvard Law School, and very specifically, something that I started to notice amongst my law students that felt like a shift from the first half of my years teaching there. I taught there for about 21 years.
Wow.
And that is that it seemed to me that even though I knew I had a very diverse class, politically, conservatives, liberals, from across the country, racially, the classroom space was getting very dull. And part of that was this realization that people were just becoming very avoidant. They were not engaging with each other around differences. And that was troubling to me because I teach negotiation and I teach conflict resolution. And one of the ways you negotiate, one of the ways you resolve is by actually engaging in conflict. Like, you can't resolve it if you're avoiding it. You can't problem solve if you can't speak about the ways in which you disagree. That observation to me also started to extend to what I saw happening in our politics and in our workplaces, that there were very high costs for engaging in disagreement
Yeah.
and very easy pathways to avoidance because of social media. And so I really thought, like, we need to figure out, why are we headed down this path, and how can we become more resilient about our ability to sit with conflict. So that's where it really started. And the more I talked to people, the more I thought it was important. And then a very good friend of mine, who happened to be a brain scientist, who wrote, particularly his work is on brain health, and really looked at brain health of younger people and noticed the high levels of loneliness and social isolation. And he
Yeah.
said to me, I think there's a connection here.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have so many. I mean, a lot of people have like different experiences with conflict and stuff like that. But just hearing you talk, a few things came to mind for me. I like, well, I don't want to say I like conflict, but I don't shy away from it in certain situations and circumstances. Like, I'm a big believer in debate and argument, whether it's disagreeing politically or disagreeing about a certain issue, or something that somebody does. Where I get frustrated sometimes is when people take a certain stance and then they don't have the ability to defend it. They just kind of take it for the sake of taking it.
Mm,
And then maybe that's like my problem. And some people, they just like, I believe that if you take a stance on something and you're trying to defend something, you should be able to explain why.
yeah.
And if you can't explain why, at least that's where I get frustrated. But when I think back to some of the most important connections that I've had, like one in particular with a very good friend of mine, we actually became particularly closer after we had a huge disagreement where we didn't talk for 2 months, 3 months.
Wow.
And then finally, we saw each other kind of walking our dogs because we live near each other. And then we got into this like 2-3 hour arguing and shouting, and other family members got brought in and this and that. And it was this whole big thing.
Wow.
But then afterwards, right, after they explained, he explained his perspective, I explained my perspective, and I apologized and he apologized, then we became closer than ever.
That's
And
interesting.
and it was funny because we were kind of both avoiding the conflict. Like, I didn't call him, he didn't call me. We just didn't talk for
Yeah.
2+ months. We would just avoid each other. Nobody would say anything.
Yeah.
And that really taught me that it's really unhealthy to do that.
Yeah.
And so we kind of promised each other, like, if there's going to be an issue in the future, regardless of what happens, we're just going to come to the other person's house and be like, yo, like, we need to talk about this.
Yeah. I love
Um,
that.
but it was, I mean, it was very uncomfortable. Like it was very, very uncomfortable for everybody, for the wives, for kids, for me, for the, like, it was just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Um, but then afterwards, we kind of talked about it and we're like, wow, it's so stupid that we didn't even talk for like 2.5 months. Like, we just wasted this time. It was so dumb. We should have talked about it earlier. So I don't know, kind of going to your point, it seems like conflict is, you can't avoid it. Um, I guess
Well, you
maybe
can avoid it, right?
you can
But there's a
hide from it.
cost
Yeah,
to
but you
it, right?
shouldn't.
If you would have avoided it here, you would just never be friends with this guy again,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
listening to you sounds like there would have been a cost to it. Maybe you would have said, oh, it doesn't matter, I don't care. But at some level, just the story proves to me you did care.
No, we were, yeah,
Yeah.
we're very, very good friends. Our families are very close. And we even talked about like this happened, I don't know, 6 months ago. And even afterwards, we said, can you imagine if we never would have talked? And one day we ran into each other when we were like 80 years old and said, hey, do you remember why we didn't talk for like 50 years? And he'd say, no, I don't even remember. Do you? And I would say, nope. And how stupid that would be.
Yeah, that's totally right. Well, you know
Yeah.
what's interesting? I mean, there's so many interesting things. I love this story, right? Because there's kind of there's threads that you're sharing here that I think are in our book on things you should do, and then maybe things you shouldn't do as well. To be honest,
Yeah.
right? But one of the things that you said right at the beginning that I think is such a main point of our book, which is that engaging in conflict, I think, quite to the surprise of many people, actually can be a source of connection. That is the mark of a strong friendship or a relationship that matters is not how well you do on the areas where you agree.
Yeah.
Whatever, we're all Yankees fans or we all like, pot roast, whatever, but how do we actually handle the disagreement? And when we go through that process of the disagreement, even if we still don't agree, there's a real opportunity for a deeper and more authentic connection.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason why that's true is so many times, whether it's like in a friendship or at work or with a family member, we decide to avoid in service of the relationship, right? We say, because I care about this relationship, I'm not going to talk about fill in the blank at Thanksgiving. But what that ends up doing over time is Thanksgiving becomes more boring because you can only talk so much about how great the cherry pie is. And then it's you start to say something like, it's 7 p.m. We have to go home and feed the dog. And then a few years later, you say something like, Johnny has a soccer game on Friday morning, so we're not coming.
Yeah.
So the avoidance to me is the slow kill. It's the slow kill on what could be a better friendship, a more authentic friendship. The other thing is that every time you avoid, you're kind of bringing the conflict to bed with you because there's a side of you that's like, you know what, I should have said something. And the side of you that's like, oh, it isn't worth it. Well, that's an internal conflict too that keeps you up at night, particularly if it matters. If it doesn't matter, it's different, right? But if it
Yeah.
matters, and so anyway, I really like so much of your story. And then I think the thing that I would say maybe our book tries to do is to offer people some tools on how to be really assertive and also be a good listener that isn't necessarily the kind of screaming or yelling or name calling, right? Because
Yeah.
that would be the piece that I would be like, oh, like how could we get your points across, Jacob, without you ceding ground, but in a way that doesn't make a scene or doesn't upset everybody else. It's uncomfortable still, right? But
It
it's
is.
effectively
Yeah.
assertive.
And the challenge, and again, there's like different types of people who deal with conflict differently. Like there's some, like I'm the type of person where if somebody comes to me with something, I am open to talking about it. I might, um, at least when people come to me with something, my default is kind of the stone wall, where I kind of
Yeah.
just, like I hear what you're saying and I can acknowledge it, but I'm not, I need time before I can relax and put my guard down and have a conversation about it. And at least if I'm arguing with somebody like that, I know how to deal with it. But then there are other people who you might address something, and I don't know what category you would call them in, but they're like, everything's fine. What are you talking about? You're
Yeah,
like, no, no, no. I can tell that like you're acting differently. No, what do you mean? Everything's good. And I don't know exactly what to call that. You know what I'm talking about, right? They
I
just,
do. Yeah, yeah. I mean, any number of things might be going on at that moment, right? One
yeah,
is that they're just avoiders, right? And
yeah,
there are a
they
set of
are
people who are
avoiders.
avoiders. Yeah,
They're kind of like, well, if I don't have anything nice to say, I'm not going to say it.
yeah,
Or they just, I don't know, like they just want to pretend that nothing's wrong when everybody knows something's wrong. And I've
yeah.
experienced this at work. I've experienced this in my personal life. And those types of people, I'm not quite sure. How do you have those conversations? Because if they're telling you nothing is wrong, you can't just be like, yes, there is.
Right. That's right. Well, it's a great question. And I think part of what you need to do there is, I would say the hard conversation you need to have with them is going meta on it. So when I say meta, maybe it's not in that moment when they're saying, I'm fine, what are you talking about? But if that's a pattern with somebody, if you it comes up two, three, four times, going to them at another moment when that's not in play and say, here's what I would like to talk to you about. I've experienced over time that there are these moments when I feel like you're frustrated or upset, and I raise it with you, and you say you aren't.
Mm,
That can often be confusing to me, and sometimes I'm not actually even sure I agree with what you're saying. I wonder if we could talk about what's happening in those moments for you and how how to best engage on that.
so you bring it
Now,
up in other moments, I guess is what you're saying.
yeah, and so you're going meta. You're not talking about each individual moment, but you're
Yeah,
saying there's a pattern of behavior that
that's interesting.
frustrates me and is confusing. And I want to talk about what's going on for me there, and I'm curious what's going on for you.
Okay.
Now, they may still say, I don't know what you're talking about, right? I mean, that'd be the worst thing. I still don't know what you're talking about. Okay, well, let me ask you this. Are you willing to have this conversation where I would describe what I'm talking about and you give me your reaction to it?
Yeah.
They may say no. Well, if they say no, that's actually insightful. Like, is this person worth my time? Most likely, even if they're not thrilled, they'll be like, okay, fine, we can have that conversation. They'll do it with you. And
Yeah.
then you're like, okay, then you have to describe here's what's going on in my head, and here's what I'm experiencing from you. What is actually going on for you in that moment? I think a lot of people will say something like, hey, I'm freezing, right? So part of what in our book we talk about five F's in the face of conflict, right? People fight, they flee, they freeze, they fawn, or they fester.
Mm.
Um, Sometimes that behavior of I don't know what you're talking about is a flee behavior. I think sometimes it's a freeze behavior. I don't know how to, I really actually don't know how to engage this. So I'll just say, I don't know what you're talking about because I have nothing else. I don't know what to do. Um, but getting them to talk about the dynamic is helpful. One of the things you said, Jacob, that I think our book really talks a lot about, and I think it's really important in conflict, is that each of us handles conflict really differently. And so, in addition to how do we talk about fill in the blank hard topic, abortion, the rules of the Little League this year, you know, same sex marriage, immigration. It's also how do we navigate the ways in which each of us handles conflict and experiences it very differently. So in the book, we talk about what we call conflict tolerance, and we break that down into two things: conflict recognition and conflict holding. Conflict recognition is what is that moment when you actually feel you're in conflict with somebody? So, like, I'm like you, Jacob, I like to debate. And I could have a big old debate with you for 2 hours and then be like, let's get a beer or let's watch a movie.
Yeah, I'm similar. Yeah.
My co-author, like this is something we learned when we were writing the book. Like we would debate about something in the book, and then our meeting would be done. I'd be like, next meeting, and then like a week later, I'd find out that he like hadn't slept and was like wondering whether the book would get done, and was I upset with him? And oh, it's like we just had a conversation. It's like then we were done with the conversation. So that's what we call conflict recognition, and I think that's very different for people. I
People
have
fight.
a
Yeah, people argue in different ways.
Yeah, I have a pretty high threshold before I think I'm in conflict with you. I just
Hmm.
think I sometimes actually think it's fun. Like I learn things.
Yeah, I'm similar. I'm similar in
Yeah.
a respective way, right? I mean, not like name calling, you're stupid, this and that.
No.
Obviously, that's great, but it's even when I like, politics is obviously a common one that comes up, but I like to challenge people frequently on their stances and their ideas and explain this and explain that, and not from like an angry perspective, but I'm just curious, like, why? Why do you think that?
Yeah.
And there are other people who will just refuse. Like
Yes.
I don't want to talk about this with you. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes. And for them, and so it's a little bit, I mean, to agree we're pretty similar on this, it sounds like can be, I mean, I've learned over time not to decide what it means because it would mean a number of things. It could mean they actually experience it as intense conflict. It could mean they're just highly avoidant. It could mean that they're worried that if the conversation goes poorly, the relationship is ruined. We don't really know. And that's why I think the kind of suggested conversation I would say, if it happens a lot with somebody, is you almost have to go meta on the conversation. Like, what is going on for you? And uh, is there a way we can have this kind of a conversation that doesn't trigger you in that way? And what would that look like?
Yeah, you kind of have to know like people's it reminds me of those role play games. I used to play those when I was very, very young, where like everyone
Yeah.
has their strengths and weaknesses, their superpowers. Like I have spells, and I'm good at wielding like a heavy sword. So everyone's got their own like their profile, their toolkit, and you kind of have to know the strengths and weaknesses of everybody before you go into these conversations.
Yes, that's exactly right. And certainly, like in kind of ongoing relationships,
Yeah,
it's important to work that out and not make assumptions.
yeah, yeah.
And
Um,
yeah,
why is it important to, I don't want to say to have conflict, but why is it important to not shy away from it? And it's kind of a two-part question because one, why is it important to address it, and how do you know which ones to address? So,
yeah,
for example, you're at a restaurant, somebody brings you, right, you order a medium steak and it comes rare. Some people might say, well, I'm just gonna have it, or they bring you a glass of wine and you don't like it. Nah, I don't want to make a big deal out of it. We have a worker that comes to your house and I don't know, maybe they leave a piece of trash or they make a mistake somewhere, and some people are like, yeah, I can just take care of it. And then there are other situations where you disagree with a friend, and some people might, maybe they'll address that and maybe they'll leave it. It's almost like there's a mental conflict escalation chart that we all have in our minds, and some people are willing to just not address anything, and others they only want to address it when it's like something crazy. So why is it important to get into the habit of addressing them, or should you address all conflict? And then how do
yeah,
you know which ones to address?
yeah, yeah. I love these questions. So one of the I think grounding principles of our book is that any like effective self-actualized human being in the world ought to have conflict resilience, which is this ability to raise conflict with other people in their toolkit. So that's like a premise. Well, why is that so important? Um, it's important because if you don't do that, you, one, you run the risk of just getting completely being run over. But two, there's a way in which you're also always disappointing the side of yourself that feels like you ought to get A, B, C, or D, or that you deserve A, B, C, or D. So I just want to say, like, as a human skill set, And we have a very strong view that we should all have this. Now, then the question becomes, and this is where I think I want to like be careful and say, that doesn't mean in every single instance you should always raise it, right? Um, so is this something that I actually think should be taught in like elementary schools? I do. I think we'd be better off if we found ways to talk about the ways we disagree, assert for ourselves effectively, problem solve in a way that isn't just highly avoidant. So then how do you decide which do I leave behind and which is it worth doing? So I think there's some diagnostic questions. By the way, I should say, like, for practice in getting this, I think telling the person who gives you the rare steak when you ask for medium rare is great practice.
Yeah.
Just if you want to build your skill set, because the risk is pretty small. What's the worst thing they're going to do? Like, I guess the worst thing is they could take your steak and spit on it and then bring it back. All right, maybe that's not great, but like, you know what I mean? It's not like you're losing your best friend. Do I, in a general day to day sense, think that every single time the garbage man leaves a candy wrapper on your yard that you should raise it? Yeah, it's probably not worth it. Um, but when is it worth it? Well, it's worth it if it's keeping you up at night. It's worth it if it's a relationship that does matter to you or once matters to you and you feel like it's being lost. It's worth it to you. It's worth it to me um, if it feels like there is some core interest of yours that isn't being met. You aren't being respected, you aren't being seen, you aren't being heard. When are some times to avoid, even when those things are in play? I would say when you feel like the other person can't come to the conversation in good faith,
Mm.
which, by the way, is very different from whether they could do it skillfully. They might not be able to do it skillfully, but at least they'd be sincere about it, right? So lots of times I coach people and whatever, they want to have a conversation with, their Uncle Rocco about something. And, Uncle Rocco is clearly not going to be super skillful. But when you ask them, they're like, no, I think he's a good guy. Like, I think he has heart in the right place. But he's going to say a lot of things that are bad. You know what? I think you should have that conversation. If the person just is completely impenetrable, isn't coming in good faith, probably not worth it. It's probably figure out how to exit this. I think the last thing I would say in terms of questions to ask yourself is if having the conversation or entering the conflict would subject you to some actual harm or re-trauma, that's also a time to pass. Because we make a very strong case in the book that discomfort is part of this and you have to lean into it. But discomfort is different from trauma. And
Yeah.
and so distinguishing that I think is really important.
Mm. So you mentioned teaching to kids. How,
Yeah.
or you, I guess adults, everybody should be learning this, right? So where would you begin? How do you like? What's the first step on where you begin teaching this?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that I actually think like having an actual class, like I think this is worth a class. I don't think it's a side skill. And, I think it can begin, I mean, I don't think it begins in first grade necessarily, but I think at the age of middle school, um, teaching basic skills of like really deep listening, of like effective assertion. How do you speak up for yourself? How do you perspective take? Um, how do you get curious about other people? I think particularly in like this highly polarized environment, I think if we had people who also just knew how to have conversations better,
Yeah.
I have a colleague at Harvard Business School. Her name is Alison Wood Brooks, and in January she came out with a book called Talk.
Hmm.
She teaches a class. So she was in the negotiation unit at Harvard Business School. I taught in the negotiation unit at Harvard Law School for many years. She taught a class called negotiation. She doesn't teach that class anymore. She teaches a class called Talk. And I have to say, like, at first, I had a little bit of an internal eye roll. Are you kidding me? Like Harvard Business School? Like talk? But the more I thought about it, the more I was like, yeah, sadly, but I think we need that class because you have a whole generation of people. They're highly connected, right? They're on their phones. They're in 15 chat groups at the same time,
Yeah.
but they're not having any conversations.
Yeah, it's bizarre.
It's bizarre. So honestly, I know maybe your listeners are going to be tuning out right now, but I think teaching young people how to have conversations like that are extended and sustained over time is really important. And I think it's more important than debate because debate, which I also love and think is great, but debate is about a highly stylized way to make a persuasive argument. Engaging authentically in a conflict is about asserting your perspective for sure and where it's coming from and why you believe it. And it's also being curious about their perspective and where it comes from and why it exists. And sometimes that could lead to problem solving. And sometimes it leads to like, okay, I guess we just kind of see it differently. And there's no bow to wrap and there's no nice thing that comes from it. And that is really important because if we can't sit with the disagreement, then we can't really live with each other. And we won't be able to engage on all the other areas where we might be able to disagree. And that's kind of where we're getting in the culture, right? Um, which I think is dangerous.
CHROs just like you have been telling me that they want a community of their peers, but specifically focused on the future of work and employee experience. I've been hearing this for around 10 years, and now I'm finally putting something together. It's called Future of Work Leaders. It's a collection of 100 of the world's top CHROs moving beyond traditional HR, specifically focused on the future of work and employee experience. I took everyone's feedback. I heard what CHROs just like you wanted. They don't want to spend a ton of money. They don't want speeches. They don't want upselling or cross-selling. They don't want any fluff. They just want to connect with their peers to focus on strategy, on insights, and on solving real-world problems, and on helping their organization become future-ready. So if that sounds like something you are interested in, check out futureofworkleaders.com. You'll be joining CHROs from brands like Dow, Lego, Neiman Marcus, Johnson & Johnson, and dozens of others. Again, it's futureofworkleaders.com. I can promise you, you will be glad that you checked it out, and I hope to see you in there. I see that a lot too, right? I mean, you go to dinner and you see kids, young kids now that are on their iPads, they're on their iPhones, like they're forgetting how to have conversation. Like I remember when I was younger, when I was 8, 9, 10, 6, if I would go to dinner with my parents, they would expect me to sit at the dinner table and I would have to participate like an adult. Like they would ask me how my day was and I would have conversations with them and, we would play board games afterwards. But there was no like, go sit over there and watch TV while we eat and then we'll kind of re-engage with you. I was taught at a very young age that if you're going to be around people, you're a person, you're a young person, and you might not know things, but you got to know how to talk. And even if what you say sounds silly, like you're a participant.
Yeah.
And today it just seems like a lot of people, not even just kids, but 18, 20, 22-year-olds, there's just a lack of this ability to talk. I mean, we have friends that have some older kids that are 13, 14, 15, and they're just Xbox and video games.
Yeah.
And I see them when I see them out on the streets, I try to have a conversation with them. They can't.
Yeah.
They're just not. And I don't know if they can't just because they don't have the attention span or they don't have the tools to know how to do it. But you can just visibly see that you can't talk to them.
Yeah.
Which freaks me out a lot.
Yeah. It freaks me out too. And I think it's all of the above, meaning, it is obviously attention span. But it's also, I think, this way in which they're engaged in 10 or 12 different things at the same time, but they're also engaged in nothing, at some weird way. And Yeah, I think it's really, I think it's very, very troubling
Yeah.
and not inevitable. I mean, I think part of the reason why just listening to you, I feel like I would bet money that part of the reason why you like to and can engage around conflict is coming from a family of origin that expected that around the dinner table, and you did those things, and you
Yeah.
got practice where you put yourself forward and people disagreed and whatever, and you are still alive to tell it. And I
Yeah.
think because I think part of the other thing that was actually really fun for me, like in working on this book with a brain scientist, is learning like how our brains work. And our brains want to avoid anything that is uncomfortable, that does feel like threat. And so if a conversation feels like threat and then we get a lot of anxiety about it, then we don't do it, then the neural pathways make it easier to do the avoidance move and harder to do the engagement move. But
Mm.
every time you do an engagement move and come out the other side and maybe learn something new, or even if you don't learn much new, you're still like, my worst fears were not realized. My body and soul are still intact. Then, because our brains are neuroplastic, the neural pathways literally get retrained, and the anxiety and cost of the engagement go down over time. One of the things that I think, and that I talk about actually is the way in which we open up the book, because I contrast my students at Harvard Law School, who I was experiencing as very avoidant, with work that I do and continue to do, although it's become quite hard to do, but have done for many years with Israeli and Palestinian young teenagers.
Oh, interesting.
And uh,
Yeah. Well,
and
there's conflict there. That's for sure.
there's conflict there. And, I mean, obviously this moment is beyond anything, but for the past 30 years, it hasn't been good. And there's been a lot of conflict, but there's cohorts of people who have come together and engaged. And I got to tell you, they are highly conflict resilient in a room. They will get into it. Do I think they are skillful all the time? Definitely not. Could I coach them to be more skillful? Absolutely. But boy, can they engage. And I think that is born of living in an environment where it's a survival skill,
Yeah.
And so um, I think we can, we have the opportunity in our country to give young people a survival skill of conflict engagement that doesn't have to be in the shadow of a war. But I feel like if we don't give them that, and if we see people just going into their cocoons more and more and more, and then telling the worst possible stories of other people, the thinnest possible stories of other people, we will find ourselves at some breaking point moment. Again, I don't want to be overly apocalyptic, but I guess going back to your first question, like, why did I write the book? I think there's something urgent about it at a cultural national level, and also something very promising at an individual, like, relationship familial level.
Yeah. I mean, because if people can't deal with conflict, that's when they lash out. They hit people, they hurt people, they, God forbid, they can kill people, they can do all sorts of things. I mean, you see this, you were talking about kids, but even my younger son, who just turned 5 recently, right? He used to have a tendency where if he would get upset and he didn't know how to deal with conflict, he would just, try to
Yeah,
like come after you, try to punch you.
yeah,
When we worked on that over time, and I'd said, I explained to him and I said, look, I'm happy to listen to whatever you want to tell me, but if you start hitting people, you're going to be tuned out right away.
yeah,
And, through a couple of weeks and months, he kind of learned where he would just say, Daddy, I'm just trying to tell you something. And I would say, that's fine. I'll stop whatever I'm doing. You want to tell me something? I'm all ears. But as soon as you pretend like you're going to hit, it's game over.
yeah,
And so now he's much more comfortable talking and sharing and expressing himself. And, he might raise his voice or get teary eyed, but he'll talk
yeah,
instead
yeah,
of
which
trying
is
to
great.
resort to something else. Um, so I was curious how this balance between conflict and psychological safety come together. Because to me, it seems like I know they're not opposed, but how to bring the two together. Because on the one hand, you want to be able to deal with conflict, But on the other hand, there's this concept of psychological safety, which I think a lot of organizations have taken it to a far extreme. Um, I even had Peter, what's the last name, Capelli, who did some of the pioneering research on this, and he actually said that you can have too much psychological safety, and too much psychological safety basically looks at where, or it manifests when you say, there's no such thing as a bad idea, you shouldn't be offended, like, you're creating this fake bubble of Pinocchio's island.
Yeah.
And his idea was like, just enough psychological safety is good enough.
Yeah.
Like, you don't have a right to not be offended. You don't have a right to not get into conflict. Like, these are things that are going to happen.
Yeah.
So how do you balance the idea of, especially in the workplace, conflict with psychological safety, where you feel like you can speak up and share and approach somebody, but at the same time, you also want people to feel safe?
Yeah. I love this. This is a great, good question. So I have a whole bunch of reactions to this, right? So first, what I would say is actually getting at, Amy Edmondson is the first one who wrote about psychological safety.
Yeah.
And her idea of psychological safety is not that people feel safe that they won't get upset or offended, but safe that they can bring up different viewpoints and maybe not get punished or shut down. Those are two different things.
Yeah. But it got
Um,
blown up.
yeah, and it got blown up, right? The other thing, this is something that in our book, I'm not a fan. I like the word psychological safety. I'm also not a fan of how do we create a safe environment for our conversation. And the reason why is I don't think anyone can really do that. You're making a fake guarantee. When you bring people in and want them to talk about hard issues that can sometimes bring up strong emotions and feelings about right and wrong and history and da 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 da, or even just different ideas about like what our advertising campaign should look like, next year. People have strong feelings about that stuff. You can't guarantee safety. I don't know how I could do that. So I think we use a phrase kind of a conflict resilient greenhouse. And I think it's very much related to like Amy Edmondson's original idea of conflict, of psychological safety, which is how do we build an environment that actually encourages disagreement in a respectful way, but that doesn't create a what's the word I want to use? Some kind of environment where you can't. There's only good ideas or bad ideas or right or wrong
Yeah, the
ways of
bubble, the
talking about
Pinocchio's
this.
island.
Right, the bubble, because there's no learning there. It actually just makes
Yeah.
people angry, and I think it ultimately results in a backlash. There's a, I talk about this in the book, but there's a great phrase that really we stole from Seeds of Peace, and the phrase that they use on their dialogues is called "be raggedy." So what they mean by that is let's in this room agree that whenever someone says something that feels like it touches a nerve, that we will assume that it comes from a place of good intention, that we will share like our reaction and then get curious from them. Then also on the other side, if you want to say something, but you're not really sure what the best way is, and you're maybe worried that someone will take it the wrong way, just say permission to be raggedy. And everyone will be like, okay, like go for it. Like say it, whatever it is. And like, you're an okay person and just say it so we can try to understand it. And
Yeah.
I think so. Sometimes I think just having uh, some kind of a language that gives some space for people to say the wrong thing or the upsetting thing. And because I think I think backlashes we've really seen in this moment around some of the attempts maybe that were made kind of coming out of the DEI initiative, right, was that there were all these like words you couldn't say, and if you said the wrong thing, you were a bad person and you were canceled. And then like people of goodwill intention saying, I'm trying to figure this out, but I feel like I'm walking on eggshells,
Yeah.
and
Okay, so
so
that's what I
yeah,
was going to ask you about is, do you think we've gotten too sensitive? I don't know, maybe sensitive is not the right word. I mean, I think we have gotten too, for lack of a better word right now, sensitive, where, we had these themes of microaggressions, to your point, everything that was going on with DEI and things that you couldn't say, um, words that were stripped. And it was, to me, it felt like we went way too far in that direction,
yeah,
like way too far. And
yeah,
so I don't know. Again, I don't know if sensitive is the right word, or politically correct, or what. Like, I think it's okay to say something stupid,
yeah,
um, and it's okay to get called out on it and to say, "Oh, you're right, that was pretty dumb." But to try to censor yourself before you need to censor yourself, or to try, right? I mean, you can't learn like that.
yeah,
Like, if I
yeah,
go
yeah,
out, if I go out and say something and somebody says, "Hey, Jacob," and I don't know, you didn't mean anything on it, but just so you know, like, that's not going to be like, "Oh, sorry about that, I didn't mean it." But you can't, again, and I don't know if sensitive is the right word here, but you can't start stripping things out and not letting people learn. So I think it's okay to be offended. I think it's okay to say something stupid. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to do all these things. But we've gotten to a point now where, like, one little slip up and people just rip your head off.
yeah,
Like, to me,
yeah.
a recent example, there's a fitness influencer. I don't know if you've been following the story. His name is Joey Swole.
No,
Oh yeah,
tell me
he's like
about
this.
it. Tell me
Yeah,
about it. Yeah.
he's this big dude, and he's helped thousands and thousands and thousands of people all over the world. He has a massive community. He's a fitness influencer,
Hmm.
and he was basically getting people to exercise, to be healthy. He would support people. He would surprise them at gyms. He was really into, like, helping people be better versions of themselves. And then he posted something about Hulk Hogan, right? When Hulk Hogan passed away, he posted
Yeah.
something about, how, Hulk Hogan was this legend and this and that, and he inspired him. And people went off on him and said, "Oh, you don't know all the bad things Hulk Hogan did, and he did all these crazy things when he was younger." And then Joey went out and he did an apology, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so
Yeah.
sorry, I didn't know about this." And everybody was just coming after him and, like, insulting him, forgetting about all the good stuff that he did, to the point where I think yesterday or day before yesterday, he just went out on social media and he's like, "I'm done. I'm done with social media. I'm
Uh,
done doing everything."
oh man,
Right. So it's like,
this is the exact opposite of conflict
yeah,
resilience.
yeah. So, like, you spend years helping people and building this massive community.
Yeah.
And I'm not even saying he made a mistake. It's just that people disagreed with him. Right. I mean, you like
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan, you don't like Hulk Hogan. Like, I don't care.
Fine. Yeah.
Right. Um, but it was just nuts because
Yeah.
people just thousands and thousands tearing him
Yeah.
apart to the point where he's like, I can't do this anymore. He just quits
Yeah.
social media.
Really sad. And this is to me, right, the problem of social media, which is that it doesn't provide opportunities for
Yeah.
conversations at all. And I would say, going back to your question, like, which was like, are things too sensitive, or have we gone overboard? I think what I think about this is that your point about the need to have a conflict resilient space, it has to be a space where people make mistakes, because you cannot have a successful difficult conversation that follows a script. Then it's not difficult. Then it's
Yeah.
a play where there's been a script written and actors are reading the act. The nature of a conversation that's hard is that it's emotional and we haven't done it before, and we're not in script land, which means that we have to have a bit of grace for each other.
Yeah.
That
Grace.
doesn't mean that, go ahead, sorry.
No, no, no. No, exactly that word. So I'm reading this book. Oh, I finished reading it, but I keep rereading it. It's called The Complete Man by
Uh huh.
Baltasar Gracian. And I have it
Uh huh.
sitting here. It's a book that this
I'm
person
going to write it
wrote in
down.
1646.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
And I love this book because one of the things that he actually talks about in there is the idea of grace and the
Hmm.
importance of grace.
Yeah.
And he basically says that the complete man, as he calls him, is somebody who's able to afford people grace when they
Yeah.
make mistakes, when they commit wrongs, is to understand that it's not always done out of malice. It's done because people are human and they make mistakes.
Yeah.
And to me, even in the workplace, it just seems like you say one wrong thing, you do
Yeah.
the wrong thing. People are trying to come after you with pitchforks and just rip your head
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, this goes back to, again, your initial question, why did you write this book? I mean, why were Harvard law students not raising things? Because we had a shift in the culture, which was if you said the wrong thing in a class. So, first of all, any place where we should be able to have a learning environment where people make mistakes, it's an academic institution. Now, if you say the wrong thing, someone is going to post something anonymously on some blog that's going to
Yeah.
ruin you. So now you're like, shall I speak or shall I just sit there quietly? Well, everyone starts sitting there quietly. Now we have what a gargantuan waste of an opportunity. I was on the admissions committee at Harvard Law School. I know how hard we worked to bring conservative and liberal students together and people from all over the world. And we spent all this time, energy, money to create this incredibly diverse community, which is now going to more or less sit there and say nothing because they're afraid that if they say something, they'll be canceled or called out and there's no opportunity for learning. So we've wasted all this time. Now they're going to go back to their homes having a big fancy degree and not having had the benefit of everything that environment could have brought them.
Yeah.
So I do think we need to figure out, how can we give each other some grace in this? Which, as you say, I think is really different from someone may say something that, frankly, like isn't like the nicest thing or a great way to say it. But then there's an opportunity to say, hey, here's how this lands on me, and here's why it lands on me that way. And what's your reaction to that? And maybe someone will be like, you know what, upon hearing that, I'm going to avoid it. Maybe someone will say, oh, upon hearing that, I'm sorry I landed that.
Yeah.
That wasn't my intention. I think you're being too sensitive, but thank you for telling me. I mean,
Yeah.
then I might not agree, right? But
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
still a
Yeah.
learning opportunity in that, I think. And one of the other things, if I could just say here, because
Of course.
I'm very sensitive to the fact that, and we do bring this up in the book, because a critique that I have gotten is your invitation, Bob Bordone, to these conversations lands very differently on people who don't have power and who are always the disadvantaged. You're asking those people to go into environments where they have to kind of suffer disproportionately, and they shouldn't have to do that. And my personal reaction to that is, first of all, you're right. There are power differences, in my view, and it does land disproportionately. That's true. But here's the other thing that I would say. If you are waiting for all power in the world to be equal before you start having hard conversations and enter into conflict,
Yeah. Good luck.
you'll be dead. You'll be dead. So that's why we need this skill. Listen, I'm not saying every single time you have to be the one in the room, but you got to have this skill. You can't just say, oh, the power is unequal, therefore we're not going to have the conversation.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. That doesn't work. And it doesn't even work to advance your cause, whatever your social cause is of change. Because if you're not in the room, that ain't going to happen.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of Future Ready Leadership. If you want to get access to more content on how you can become future ready, make sure to subscribe to the newsletter. It's thefutureorganization.com/newsletter. And if you enjoyed this episode, please send it to somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. Thanks for listening or watching, and I will see you next time.